This particular chapter can be titled "Comeliness and Repugnance are Determined by Law." So in this context here, the legal definition, that's what we're after, of comeliness, or it's kind of like what is called hasan or husn, which is good, if you will, in general. The legal definition, what we're referring to, what the Imam is referring to, is that which is praised and rewardable. So we're talking essentially about deeds that are rewarded by Allah, whether they be obligations or recommendations. And repugnance, which is qubh, just like something that's evil, is that which is dispraised and punishable. Right? So there's some technical meaning to these very general terms that has to be understood when kind of approaching the topic. And we're going to cover this topic very, very briefly. And there's a much greater coverage in books of usul al-fiqh. And this just happens to be in an aqidah book because it is connected with a number of different sects. Their take on, how the human mind plays into determining Islamic law, what the role of the mind is in determining the Islamic rulings. So he begins, Imam Ibn Balbani says, conventional reasoning is pursuant to and coincides with legal texts. Conventional reasoning, like the human intellect, is pursuant to and coincides with legal text. It does not preside over them. Right? The human intellect is not what frames Islamic law. It does not drive it. It does not steer it. It does not confine it. It does not alter it. But rather, it is the Islamic law that is the leader here, that presides over human intellect. So while the mind can come to some conclusions, some basic conclusions of what is praiseworthy and what is repugnant, like the nature of saving a drowning person, naturally we would conclude that that's a praiseworthy thing, or seeking knowledge, knowing things is a praiseworthy thing, or, for example, the repugnance of accusing the innocent. We would all come to the determination or the agreement that that's evil, or the status of ignorance, to remain ignorant. So while we and our minds can conclude those things, the mind does not play a role in establishing moral obligation. Just because we can determine certain things through our intellect and our understanding of the world around us, whether they're praiseworthy or whether they're repugnant, we don't establish legal or moral responsibility. Essentially, we cannot obligate a reward or obligate a punishment from our human minds. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that establishes taklif, or moral responsibility. He's the one that sets the boundaries and the rules. And if we understand them, great. If we can agree with them on a human level, perfect. Otherwise, that is his task. And thus, Imam says, in the legal sense, neither comeliness or repugnance, gratitude nor denial, praise nor censure, imperative nor prohibition are determined except by law. So it should be noted here that the Islamic law's most fundamental rulings, such as things like tawheed, the belief in Allah's oneness, they do not contradict sound human intellect. The most fundamental Islamic laws do not contradict sound intellect. Sound, that is. Not something that's corrupted or deviated, but sound intellect. And the Islamic law may possess subsidiary rulings that escape human understanding. You may find some things that are beyond our understanding, that are not rational, like wiping over the top of the sock as opposed to the bottom of the sock, things of that nature. And so, while the human mind has the potential to understand the nature of the ruling, if it does not comprehend or does not agree with the conclusion, it doesn't justify the law's abrogation or ratification. Just because you don't understand something or you cannot agree with something, you don't have the right to change it or to abrogate it. Say, oh, that doesn't apply. Rationally, that doesn't make sense. That's of no worth, no value. So we're going to get rid of that law. We don't abrogate Allah's laws, nor do we ratify them to change them to suit our own intellect or our understanding. And so he concludes this chapter. He says, therefore, neither permissibility nor any other ruling are fully known except by way of it. By way of it meaning the Shari'ah, the Islamic law. There's no rational ruling for anything which precedes the advent of law. So this last line in particular, there's a lot that can be said about it. Talking about the different opinions among the various schools of thought when it comes to usul. Because there are a couple of major schools of thought when it comes to, how they handle this particular topic. And that's something that perhaps we can deal with in another session. But what you should walk away with today with this chapter, or what I'd like you to walk away with, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the legislator. Allah is the one that legislates and determines ultimately what is considered a moral obligation or responsibility. He determines the rulings of our actions and their consequences. And as his servants, our job is to hear and obey. And while we are encouraged to use our minds to better understand and develop a level of certainty and conviction, limited mental capacity, or even worse, letting our desires get in the way. Because for a lot of people, it's not about comprehending the law more than it is about just not wanting to act upon it because it doesn't work for my whims. I don't like that because I'd rather do something else. I'd rather be doing the haram thing or the makruh thing, or I'd rather be doing something different because that's just what's going to make me feel good and feel happy. So this is even worse, that you let the desires come in the way, and these things cannot impede our obedience to Allah.